The only time where I feel like my face and stuff might not give away like what I mean is when I'm listening to people. So like when I was listening to Destiny earlier, I wasn't thinking at all about like whatever's going on. Like I'm painting the words that he's saying and I'm trying to figure out like how they work in my head. And then I'm drawing like a bunch of pictures and stuff on the desk to try to like remember visually some of his arguments. But that's because that's how my memory works, which we'll talk about, because one of the topics that we'll be doing next week are study skills. So one thing specifically that I teach people through tutoring is how to study, because, well, who better to learn how to study from than the guy that does college for people for a living, right? That I have to walk into a final the day of with an hour or two in the textbook and pass. That's what I have to do. So I want to give people information as somebody who has to do that for a living. How do you do that? And how do you not cram? How do you learn enough to where like every single test you take, you're referencing back information that you already studied? Because that's what really makes those tests easy for me, is that like I have a plethora of other information that I studied very well that's already anchored in my brain. So I don't have to really study for a test. I walk into the test, I do a skim through the book to like understand which concepts I'm going to have to reference from memory, and then I just take the test. All I'm doing is thinking about like, what does this professor seem to focus on? What does he really want the kid to take out of the class? Like, oh, he's focusing on these particular people. He's authored work on these particular like points of study. He talks about this field in his papers. So his exam's probably on this. And then I take it and I pass. It's very, very easy. Once you've studied everything, it's super easy. But it's getting that studying, learning those skills. How does your memory work? What should a study session look like for you? We start with, I guess we could just go through it. We start with comprehension, which is the most important thing. Let me go ahead and grab a whiteboard real quick. Okay. So like this is what I use when I need to teach reading comprehension. Anywho, it's like a giant whiteboard, but it has broken down all the points of comprehension. So I think that there are like layers of speech that you have to break through in order to understand somebody. So like to get back to your question earlier about like how do we make sure we have all the arguments heard, or like we're viewing things neutrally or whatever, we first have to remove the rhetoric of the speech, and then we have to look at the logic of it. That's often the easiest way. So that's the easiest way when we're talking about logical structures to do things. So the reason I teach comprehension is it cuts through the rhetoric, it cuts through the extra stuff of what somebody is saying, and it summarizes what they're saying in a logical way. So without opinion and bias and whatever, it's just like, these things lead to these things, or these things relate in this way. We're just describing nouns and the relationships between them. That's all that we're doing. So what that looks like on this board, basically, is I walk people through all the layers that we have to take away from a text. So we take out the rhetoric, we isolate the ideas, and then we write in what the actions are. So what are we have ideas, and then we need relationships between those ideas. And then the network of relationships between different ideas tells us what your opinion is about something. It's like the stars, all the dots, and then the constellations that we draw between them. It's the same exact thing. So we need to isolate ideas in the text, figure out what the relationships are between these items, and you'll start to see patterns. So like, oh, okay, she uses transgender people bully, that are men but pretending to be women, this. Like, oh, okay. And if that repeats over and over again, this like framing of trans people that are problematic as men pretending to be women, then we can kind of put two and two together, right? Or like, in any kind of text, if we break down the main ideas and we see them repeat, we know what's most important to the author. We know what are the most convincing things they think. We can see repetition a lot easier. We can see the structure and flow of argument. Like, oh, okay, that's how transitions work. People ask me, hey, how do I do transitions? Like, people tell me my transitions are no good. What does that mean? Well, it means the logical flow between your bigger constellations of opinions are bad. So if we have one paragraph, typically that's one little constellation. It's one whole idea or a part of an idea. That becomes more clear when we draw out what the ideas are, but just in the text, like you're talking about one part or aspect of an idea. How well you're able to connect one independent argument or aspect to another one is how well you're able to transition. So, how well are we making the logical leap between ideas that are far apart? There's a million reasons why that could be. Either there could be a really big gap between these two logical clusters such that like you can't traverse it because these two things don't make sense and that's why your transitions are bad. But a lot of the time it's like you had these two lumps that were really close and we could have just drawn something in between right here, but we didn't. I don't know why. Usually there's anxiety about how we make this transition. Like, how do I go from this, therefore that? And it's like, well, you have to be confident and you have to make your argument confidently and you have to make your argument all flow. How would you actually explain this to somebody in real life? Well, I would start by like doing my definitions because they would have to know my definitions to be able to do all this stuff. Like, let's see, a question. I need more like really want around 80% on my final exams. I have around, oh, somebody got a wheel spin. We'll do that wheel spin 2 seconds. Maybe 15 days to study tips. So what I said, you need to break each of these classes or courses down into their individual component ideas. That's not good. I guess my drawing tablet's broken, so we actually won't be doing that. Let's spin that wheel, and then I'll answer your question while I do it. Okay, so you have 15 days. That's kind of rough, bud, if I'm being quite honest. Man. Okay, so 15 days. Yeah, break down each of your classes into what the units are. And then after you're done breaking down the units, okay, I'll read that later. Once you have it broken down into units, break it down into the concepts that you discuss in each unit. And if that's unclear to you, you need to do more studying. But the other important thing is remember, contextualize everything as far as like what's going to be on the exam. If they gave you a practice test, you're fucking golden. I would study based on the concepts you need to know to answer the practice test questions. And if you go through all of the practice test questions and for each question you're noticing like, oh, 80% of them are about this topic. That's what I mean by reading comprehension is a good skill because you can apply it to other stuff. So if I categorize every single question on the test in terms of like the concept it's getting at or the unit in the class that it's referring to, and I'm like, well, 80% of them are for unit 2. Okay, well then I know what to study. I'm going to read unit 2 and I'm going to break it down. And then like that also tells you how deep you need to go. So if we divide them up by units, like which question occurs in which unit, and then we we narrow it down to a single unit, it's 80%, then we can break it down by the concept within the unit and we can do it that way. That's one way. The way that I approach it typically is I quickly go through the class, the unit, and all of the chapters and figure out like what are the main ideas and what is the perspective that we're taking on this. So like some teachers that teach psychology want to do like have a really Freudian slant to how they explain everything. I don't know. So you just do it that way. Or some business classes will have a ton of focus on like case studies. So like the teacher wants you to read all their case studies. There are going to be questions about it on the test. So like read the case studies. And if I read the case studies, like, oh, they make you read the case studies because they tell you all of the concepts that are going to be on the test. Easy peasy, like double win. How do I do my wheel? All widgets? Do. We have to go to the wheel. The wheel! We're on the wheel. Okay, let's flip the camera. Okay. Let's get this wheel going, guys. It's so hard to read. Okay, we're going to give it a spin. Fuck, where's the button for that? Boo. I don't see it. Oh, there it is. We're going to spin that wheel, boys. Oh, I hope it's not something silly. Oh, what'd you land on? Mine? Well, sounds like we're going to have to get to Minecraft then. We'll do that while I'm doing all this other stuff. Okay. So Yeah, so break it down by the unit, break it down by the chapter, figure out which ones are probably going to be the most important, study those. But do you have any other questions like beyond that? I don't really know. You have to break it down and be strategic about the studying itself. Now, if your question is like, what do you mean by study? Well, that's a different question. So like this is just assuming that you can do the study part. How you would break it down and be efficient is by looking at the units and the chapters and the concepts. If you want like, how do I actually study? That's different. How you actually study is you have to break down all the concepts into their component parts and their ideas and understand them all intimately in a logical system in your head that you can manipulate and it makes sense. So like what I aim to have in it's an amorphous idea, like knowledge and understanding and whatever. What I try to make my goal in tutoring when I'm with kids and I need them to come away understanding something is they have to be able to answer a bunch of questions that I give them correctly. And it has to be questions that aren't just like rote memorization of what to do.
Here
they
comes the money.
Oh, thanks.
Here we go. Money talk.
Oh, camera is upside down. You got me. Thanks for the subscription. That's great. I really appreciate that. Let's rotate this 180. Dope. All right, sick. Yeah, I really appreciate that. That's rad. Now, as far as whatchamacallit, what are we talking about? Oh yeah, studying. So, as far as the actual studying, the way I test people is I try to make sure that they have like an amorphous idea in their head that seems to always get the correct answer. I don't really care what it is or how they get it. That's why I don't care about logic so much. Like it doesn't super matter until we have problems. So I just try to get them to have an intuitive understanding for it, and you should too. You should be able to connect all the ideas in the book together. Like there's a rhyme and reason to why things were ordered in your textbook the way that they're ordered a lot of the time. And when you start seeing greater patterns and things beyond like what you're individually studying, I would say you've started to like understand it, and you're moving on to like different levels of understanding. But yeah, your goal should be to pretty intuitively understand it. You should be able to teach somebody else about it and not have problems. That's another good way to study, is to teach it to somebody else. Like sometimes if something's really hard for me, like I read like a whole passage, but I'm like, I feel like I understand it, but if I had to explain it back, I don't know if I could put it into words. Every time I catch that, I go, Noah, you got to go back and read it. Don't fucking, you're going to have to go back and read it. Don't chicken out of the work. But sometimes it happens like that. Sometimes it do be like that. You should do that when you read, though. If you can't explain back what you just read, your comprehension is shit. You need to work on your comprehension. For most people, their comprehension is shit. So it's typically where I have to focus with them.